The following is a PBS Election 2012 special event.
Welcome to the WQLN TV Live Democratic Senatorial Debate for Pennsylvania's 49th Senate District with WQLN host and moderator Kim Young.
And good evening from the studios of WQLN. I'm Kim Young of WQLN, and I welcome you to tonight's debate between the candidates vying for Pennsylvania's 49th District Senate seat, Democrat Shawn Wiley and Republican Janet Anderson. Good evening to both of you. It is truly an honor to have you here in the studio and be able to moderate tonight's debate. Tonight's debate will cover a wide array of topics. The specific questions and subjects were developed by me and have not been shared with or cleared by anyone. Each candidate will have a minute and a half to respond to my questions, and they will each have a minute and a half to comment on their opponent's response. As per the agreed upon rules of tonight's debate, I can use my discretion as moderator to extend the discussions by asking follow-up questions. By coin toss, it has been determined that Janet Anderson will be the first to answer the opening question. Ms. Anderson, let's begin with questions surrounding what surely are elephants in the room, and those are negative campaign ads and endorsements. In a series of ads run by your campaign, an announcer levels a laundry list of charges against Mr. Wiley from his work as Director of Administration for former County Executive Mark DeVecchio. The ad blames Mr. Wiley for, and so let me quote here, property tax increases of 22%, out-of-control spending, $92 million of debt, and the loss of 7,700 jobs. You've been quoted as saying, Janet, that the ads weren't negative campaigning, they were comparative campaigning. I'm wondering if you can expand on that and explain what you meant. How are these comparative and not negative?
We focused on the nature of the position that Mr. Wiley was in. Shawn held the position of second in command, second to only the county executive. He mentions in his LinkedIn that he is responsible for the budget preparation. He mentions in an ad that he sent out that he is responsible for nearly 1,100 employees and a $380 million budget. This ad points out that while he was responsible for those things, these other things occurred. Taxes went up. Debt increased at the county. Now, I also worked for the county in the previous administration and had the opportunity to show my accomplishments while at the county. An $8 million revolving loan fund, the completion of the county comprehensive plan, the completion of a solid waste plan, the introduction of an entrepreneurial assistance program, an international trade program. All of those programs continue to exist today. We can discuss the reasonableness and the artfulness of the ad, and different people have agreed or disagreed. And I'm willing to have that debate, but you can't take credit and not take some of the blame for the administration that you worked in.
Thank you. Mr. Wiley, your response to that?
Well, I have to say, I've learned a lot in this process. I've learned a tremendous amount about what some candidates will say or do to influence voters to get their vote. I really believe, and I've said this in past interviews, that the ad was misleading and bordering on deceitful to voters. I think it's been laid out by third parties that the responsibility of implementing additional taxes or influencing pay raises was not under the responsibility of the Director of Administration. The role of the Director of Administration was primarily operational in nature. And actually in the prior debate, my opponent laid out my responsibilities very clearly, which stated exactly the role of the Director of Operation being operational in nature. Didn't have the ability to impose additional taxes or reduce the workforce by 7,700 in Erie County. It really is unfortunate, and I was very disappointed that my opponent decided to take that approach.
Let me just follow up here and start with you, Mr. Wiley, and then go to Ms. Anderson. I've seen the mailers that your campaign put out, and you say, as the county's Director of Administration, you managed a $380 million budget and managed 1,100 employees. Isn't that the job of the county executive? And if it isn't, if that was in fact your job, doesn't that make Ms. Anderson's claim more fair?
Well, actually, no. We managed within a $380 million budget. My responsibility was to oversee 13 different departments in Erie County, the day-to-day operations of the county. And it's a large responsibility, and I took it very, very seriously. And I learned a tremendous amount in that process. But the claims that were made in the advertising, specifically in the media, in the electronic media, and also in the mailers, was completely inaccurate. It painted a picture of me being responsible for everything that went, the downturn in the economy during the time frame that I was an employee of the county, which is truly, like as I said earlier, is misleading. We can say the same thing about another person that worked for an elected official at the same exact time. Ms. Anderson worked for Jane Earl at the time. Jane Earl was an elected official as well in that same time frame. So using that same logic, we would say, yes, Ms. Anderson is responsible for all of these same things. I would never do that because it's really misleading.
Ms. Anderson, your response.
I would first say that if you look at my career and you look at it in total, there were 22,000 jobs created during the time that I started my career and the 26 years. I have gone back and checked that out. In addition, mine was not the first ad that went out. There was an ad sent out by allies of my opponent, PSEA, indicating that I was, in fact, going to take pensions away from teachers and going to reduce the budget for the education. That is an outright lie. I have never said that. My PSEA survey or questionnaire that I submitted does not say that. It very clearly states that the only way that I would fund vouchers is if the same requirements of the public schools would be placed on the private institutions that would receive those dollars. So I was very clear in that. That was an outright lie about my campaign, and I'm offended by that mailer as well.
I want to pick up here. I wasn't going to go into education, but I think that's a perfect segue. So let's talk about public education. Both of you have said that you are deeply committed to public education, products of public education. So we'll start with you, Ms. Anderson, on this question. You have said you support vouchers. Can you support public education and vouchers? Is there a balance?
There is a balance. And what that is by requiring the same things of the schools that receive the vouchers, taxpayer dollars, we're saying that they must comply with the same rules and regulations of a public school. Many schools, Grove City College is an example, will not likely take those vouchers as a result of the imposition of the government requirement.
Separation of church and state.
Exactly. So I believe that it is, in fact, very different from most Republicans that are out there talking about the voucher system. And I'll go one step further. I believe that we should allow our public schools to become charter schools if they choose. Currently, they're not allowed to do that. And I think that that allows them to become competitive. My final point is that while I was preparing to go and speak with the PSEA, I found out a program called Solutions That Work. This is a great program. I believe that they're missing a couple minor components, and we talked about that in my interview with PSEA. I would be willing to, in the state Senate, pull together a group of teachers, educators at the higher ed level, technical school level, as well as employers to talk about solutions that really work.
Your response, Mr. Levy.
Well, I have to say, that the mail piece that my opponent is referring to as far as the launch of this negative campaign was exactly that. It was by one of the groups that is supporting my campaign and not by my campaign, number one. I do not believe that you can support a voucher system and still continue to fund public education effectively and responsibly. I feel that when we have the challenges that we face in public schools, the answer is not depleting those schools or taking funding away from those schools. If we face challenges in the educational system, we must continue to fund them responsibly and make sure we hold those schools and these educators responsible or accountable to holding the standards that we keep very, very high. I think that the teachers are not the culprits here. I believe that I've been very, very critical of the governor's cuts to this education budget. Very critical. I believe that it jeopardizes our kids, the future of our children. I believe that it increases our class sizes. It does not give the teachers the tools that they need to educate our children, and I believe that it's not the way in the direction that we need to go in this community and throughout the Commonwealth.
Let me follow up on the vouchers question again. I'm going to start with Ms. Anderson because I think it's important to clarify here. Who would get these vouchers if you're elected to the state Senate? How do you see this working? One of the criticisms has been that wealthy people can't afford to send their children to private schools, to the best schools. Do you see these vouchers going to low-income minorities? Who do you see getting these vouchers?
There is a program that was just approved that allows vouchers or tax credits to go to businesses for low-income, non-producing school districts. So low-income families in non-producing school districts, that's where I would focus my effort. But let me go back to something that Sean mentioned a couple minutes ago. You know, we're criticizing the governor for these cuts, and he made proposed cuts. There's no question about that. They were proposed cuts, but the Senate Republicans restored that budget and in the process. So it's important to recognize that those funds were in fact not in total put back in place. And I think that we need to go further. I'm not picking on the teachers either. There are some great teachers out there, but we need to make sure that we're producing a product at the end of the day that can go into the workforce, that meets the needs of our employers. We need to also make sure that we are producing a product, our children, that are prepared to go into college without having to spend an extra year or an extra semester or 2 or 3. We need to also make sure that they're prepared to go on to technical school if that's what they choose. We're not doing that. We need to reform the education system, and we need to do it now.
Mr. Wiley.
Well, let me clarify one point. It was a bipartisan effort. This is not a partisan issue. It was a bipartisan effort from the Senate to influence, to restore some of the funding to education, number one. And what we're not talking about parochial schools. We're not talking about specific private schools throughout the community that we realize. We're talking about schools that can be run by corporations for profit. That's where these voucher systems are going. I don't believe that the for-profit organizations should be responsible for educating our kids. I believe that the public school system, and by the way, we're talking about a finite number of children that are being supported in a voucher system. The vast majority of our kids are serviced through the public education system, and I believe that we have to continue to fund it and enhance it to make sure it's as strong as it possibly can be.
Let me go back to the elephant in the room, the one other issue with the elephant, and that is endorsements. And so I'm going to start with you, Mr. Wiley. As you well know, your former boss, the county executive, Mark DeVecchio, has come out in support of Ms. Anderson. What do you make of that, and how damaging is that to you, and how do you get through that?
Well, I was disappointed, as you can imagine. But again, throughout this negative campaigning and this launching of this negative campaigning, my opponent painted a broad brush and and called me out for being responsible for all of these negative things that happen throughout the county. And I believe that it's hypocritical to accept the advisement and the endorsement from the elected official that was truly the county executive and responsible for the executive branch of government. Now, I do not dodge my responsibilities that I had in the county government. I've never hidden anything. And I have to tell you, my responsibilities were very different than the county executives. My responsibilities were the day-to-day operations of the county. My opponent should know that, being a former county employee and in understanding the role of government, which she should know that this is a operational role that I held. So in accepting the endorsement from the former county executive in the time frame that she's called me out on so many preposterous allegations is really, truly hypocritical, in my opinion.
Ms. Anderson, I think Mr. Wiley brings up a good point, and it was a person who wrote in a letter to the editor raised the same issue. How can you, on the one hand, criticize Mr. Wiley for the administration, for what is clearly the administration's issues, and yet turn around and accept the endorsement of Mark DeVecchio?
Sure. I can understand the question, but let me put it this way. The administration is the administration. He was second in command. I did not work in that administration. We were critical of the fact that he took credit for a $380 million budget and nearly 1,100 employees. And we were critical of, we were trying to point out to the people that in fact, if he were in charge of all of that, then he also has to take some of the blame for the other piece of it. Now, as far as the endorsement goes, Mark DeVecchio, when I worked in the Schenker administration, was my liaison on county council. He was the economic development liaison. He and I worked together on many issues, day in and day out. Mark DeVecchio knows my strengths. He knows my strength in economic development. So I was not surprised when he came out in support of my campaign, given that the most important issue facing Erie County right now is job creation and poverty. And the way that we fix that is through job creation, making sure that we have the pipeline of employees of the future and the immediate need through workforce development.
Let me follow up. So you do not feel that it's hypocritical to criticize the administration, which is Mark DeVecchio, for job losses, the debt, and yet then trumpet his endorsement of you?
I don't. I believe that his endorsement was completely separate from our criticism of my opponent taking credit for the administration. He worked with me. He knows my strengths. He knows my background in economic development, and he knows what the issues of the day are. So I do not believe that it is hypocritical, and I do believe that it's an important endorsement because it shows my ability to work across party lines to get things done. Mark and I have worked together even after I left the county. He appointed me to the Airport Authority Board, and I'm still a member of that board. So I believe he knows my strengths, he knows my abilities, and he's willing to step up and say that, knowing both of us, I'm the better candidate for this position.
And how do you respond to that, Mr. Wiley? It's not hypocritical, Ms. Anderson
Well,
says.
I think on its face it is, my personal opinion. And I think that, yes, Ms. Anderson worked for the Schenker administration prior to the DeVecchio administration coming into play. And actually, Ms. Anderson was released by Mark DeVecchio in November of the prior year when he was elected into office. And now, coming into this, it's very interesting to see the whole dynamics. And I think that we've seen this, not necessarily from my campaign. This has been coming out from third parties, people writing in letters to the editor, people very, very confused. And one of the things that we found in the campaign that my opponent has decided to launch, it's confusing to the voters. And people wonder, why do they launch negative campaigns? Why do candidates do that? And it is an effort to confuse voters and really to mislead them in such a way to really gain votes. And yes, it has been disappointing, and it's been very difficult throughout this process. We have made a conscious decision, my campaign, and by the way, everything that goes out of my campaign has my approval. Everything with my name on it has my approval. And we made a conscious effort. I made a very conscious effort, even against the advisors that I have had, not to do that, not to launch negative campaigning, and not to take that approach. And I'm very, very proud of our campaign.
Let me follow up here. Are you proud of the campaign that you have waged, each of you? And we'll start with you, Mr. Wiley, and you stand by all of the ads that have run and all of the tactics during these last many months that you've been out there campaigning. Are you comfortable? Do you sleep well at night after this campaign?
Kim, absolutely. I am so proud of the campaign that we have run. I am so proud of so many people that have made this possible. We have run a campaign based on the issues. We have run a campaign based on what I feel is the best direction for this community. I do sleep well at night. It may not show because we've been working so hard, but I have to tell you, we have been working very diligently, and once we get our message out, our support network grows exponentially. We have been so fortunate to have so many people working so hard to make this commitment to really making this happen, and it's all about messaging. If you notice, our campaign messages have been all about the key elements of a strong community and what we feel is the best direction that this community has to go. And that's what we're going to continue to do through November 6th.
Ms. Anderson, you have been quoted as saying that ad was a decision of your campaign manager, not you, but you stand by it. Do you still stand by it?
No, I never said it was a decision made by my campaign manager. I don't know where you heard that. What I have said is that I am a first-time candidate. I have many advisors. Many of the same people that have endorsed me have advised me. Negative campaigning has been going on for a very long time, and I am not ashamed of the fact that we did this. We listened to our advisors. I made the decision to go ahead with it. It was a difficult decision, but it was something that once my opponent made the decision to send out a flyer indicating that he was in charge of the county, that we went ahead with. No one made that decision without my approval. That was made with my approval. So I want to make that clear. But I'm offended in some ways that everyone continues to talk about my negative campaigning, and everything in my campaign is factual. It may not be 100% my opponent's responsibility, but he was a player and he was the closest advisor to the county executive. He, on the other hand, and whether he knew his allies were sending out a flyer or not, he got it, he received it, I'm sure, and saw it, and he did not denounce it. And later, he sent his own ad out.
I think we'll move on from the big old elephant in the room, and so I did bring a prop today, and it is the Erie Times News, which, as you I think both have probably seen, the unemployment rate, of course, is up in the county. So all candidates, I think we talk and certainly have heard a lot about jobs, the economy being the number one issue, job creation being the most important issue. So assuming that both of you agree that this is the number one priority, what specific plans do you have and specific plans to get people in this district back to work? Sean, let's start with you.
I have to say that there's not a magic wand. This is not something that either one of us, when we get elected, are going to make a change immediately. It's not possible. In my opinion, the way to economic stimulus is through an atmosphere for growth, and I believe that that's what government can provide. I feel that we have to have key elements of a strong community. I feel that we must have a strong educational system and make sure that we're preparing our children to enter the workforce and giving them a strong foundation to be able to succeed. I feel that we have to invest in our infrastructure. We must continue to invest in our infrastructure to attract additional business to come into this community and also retain our existing business here. We must also continue to invest responsibly in public safety. We must have safe environment and safe neighborhoods to live in to attract additional businesses and to retain the businesses that we have. And lastly, we have to invest in incentives for private sector to be able to expand their workforce and expand their companies within our communities. I've launched a Made in Pennsylvania tax incentive. I've introduced that, which really is an incentive program for organizations that make their products here in Pennsylvania, and also a downstream incentive for like businesses and downstream businesses that complement that product line, that they can attract additional companies to come in here to reduce their transportation costs, to reduce their cost of goods sold, and eventually increase the profits for these organizations and continue to maintain a strong economic base here. So we have a really great plan. We are really excited about having all of the pieces of the puzzle in place. That's the only time that you can really stimulate job growth in a community, in my opinion.
Ms. Anderson, plans to stimulate job growth.
Sure. Remember, I've spent 26 years talking to businesses, talking to them about what's important to them, why they invest in Pennsylvania and why they don't. I've done foreign direct investment. I've done domestic investment. I've worked with our local employers on retention efforts as well as expansion efforts. I know without a doubt that they want government out of their way and an opportunity to grow on their own. That's without a doubt the way that they would like it. If we go in, and I've called my campaign, the focus of it, employers and employees. If we go into this with the idea that we are going to lower corporate net income tax, we will allow our employers to continue to grow. We will give them the opportunity to expand. We will also create an environment that other employers want to come into. But in order to do that, we must sow the seeds of progress. And the things like public education are important for our employees of the future. Workforce development, to get our immediate needs filled because we have a skills gap. Infrastructure, making certain that we're able to move raw materials in, goods and services out into a global economy, as well as the people. Employees have to be able to travel to where they need to be. And finally, we need to make sure that we have healthy and safe communities so that we have a place that people want to be, so that we are able to attract our employers and grow and keep our employees here. Let's bring our families back to Erie.
Let me follow up, Ms. Anderson, on that, and then Mr. Wiley respond. You say get government out of the way. That seems to be the catchphrase of the campaign this term. So get government out of the way, government out of our lives. What role do you think then government has in our lives? How do you see government?
Well, in terms of employers, what we need to do is make certain that our government is not holding them back. So, for example, our corporate net income tax of 9.99% is the second highest in the nation. If you couple that with our capital stock and franchise tax, we are the second highest in the world if we were a country. We have got to look at ways to make that competitive. I'm not suggesting that we do it overnight and tomorrow we cut it to 6.99%, but that would be my target. We need to look at 6.99% as where we should be. We also need to continue to move that capital stock and franchise tax out, eliminate it. We need to ensure that our net operating loss cap has been removed because it's holding us back from attracting research and development companies, the very types of companies that we want to grow here. In addition, we need to look at our burden of regulations. We need to ensure that we are not putting our businesses out of work. We need to ensure that we're not forcing them to lay people off to comply with our regulations. Sometimes Pennsylvania jumps into a pilot program and we do those kinds of things with regulations. DEP regulations are an example of that, where we have forced businesses to lay people off in order to comply. Let's work with our businesses so that they can comply.
Mr. Wiley, same question. How do you see, what is the role of government?
Well, it's very common to talk about corporate tax breaks. It's very common to talk about we're going to offer all of these tax breaks to all of our corporations within the state of Pennsylvania, and we're not going to continue to regulate. We're going to deregulate everything, and we're going to give tax breaks to large corporations. Well, that is not the answer, in my opinion. I believe that there are opportunities for us to close some of these tax loopholes to increase revenue in this state without burdening our working families. I think, first of all, I don't believe that completely depleting the tax base for our corporations is the answer. What is the role of government? I believe the role of government is making sure that we maintain an atmosphere for economic growth. I believe that I mentioned the core elements of a strong community, and I believe that we have to continue to invest in that. You know, I've been very critical of some of the human service cuts that this governor has imposed and through the Department of Public Welfare. Very quickly, looking at a budget cut, the governor proposed a 20% budget cut. In bipartisan effort, it was reduced to 10% budget cut in human services. That still means $2.8 million in this community. That's an obligation that government has, is to make sure that make sure the people that need the services the most get the services they need. We also we're not paying our caregivers, the people that take care of those that need the assistance. We're not paying them for 3 months, 4 months. And writing a letter to the governor is not the answer either. We have to have a loud voice to make sure that we can make sure we maintain this. And we're taking the urban to rural designation. That is another 7% cut to the providers for the services that the core services that we need. So that is, in my opinion, the true role the government should play.
Let's talk about regulation in a different area. You know, both of you certainly are well aware that the Marcellus Shale Formation it's been called the global superstar of natural gas formations, and it's been said that the Marcellus Shale, much of which runs beneath the 49th District, could help make us an energy capital of the nation and spark the rebirth of our manufacturing base. Let's talk about those DEP regulations, and in light of environmental concerns about fracking, how do we, and we'll start with Mr. Wiley and then you, Ms. Anderson, how do we balance that? How do we balance being good stewards of our environment while at the same time developing our natural resources?
Well, I could tell you that the answer is not depleting the resources to the Department of Environmental Protection, and that's exactly what's happening now. We're reducing the budget for the DEP while this process is going on. And not receiving any benefit from the drillers. So in my opinion, that's one of the key elements of increasing revenue to this state, continuing to fund and protect our environment. And by the way, I've been endorsed by Sierra Club and also Conservation PA. So I'm very aware of the needs that we have in our environment. But if we were to impose a similar model as a neighboring state, the state of West Virginia, that would mean $800 million into this state, first and foremost. A lot of those dollars could go towards making sure that the regulations are in place through the DEP to address some of these issues and make sure that our drillers are holding up to the standards and continue to regulate that effectively. That's one area that I do not believe that we should be deregulating.
Ms. Anderson, how do we balance that, the environment development?
We absolutely need to make sure that we have a balance there. I agree that it is an important area. And when I talk about regulations, I'm not talking about deregulating or cutting taxes for businesses and giving them a tax break. What I'm talking about is something reasonable so that we're able to keep our businesses here. It's important to make our businesses feel welcome in Pennsylvania so that they don't want to go to another state. We must balance and make certain that Marcellus Shale is successful here. We have put an impact fee on. I personally believe we haven't gone far enough. We can go further. I've worked with and talked with the industry, but it's a balance in making certain that we do not force them out of the state of Pennsylvania. We need to make sure that we are not depleting our resource and make certain that we, in fact, are working with our industry to put out what I'll call a blacklist, a list of those companies that are not keeping up with the regulations that Pennsylvania has in place so that our property owners know who they can go to and who they can trust.
I want to move on to a completely different question. This is a Kim Young sort of question. So as you've campaigned in the district over the last many months, we just sort of talked about this before we went to air and how grueling that can be and the doors that you've knocked on, thousands and thousands of people. What stories do you carry with you? What stories have touched you, and what stories will you carry, the faces of those people whose stories you've heard, if you are going to Harrisburg? Mr. Wiley and Ms. Anderson.
Well, I have to tell you that there's been a number of stories. This has been an amazing, amazing process. And I've met so many wonderful people in this journey. There are a couple of instances. I have one gentleman that comes to my headquarters quite frequently, and he's in a wheelchair, and he's feeling the impact of some of the budget cuts that have been imposed and some of the policy decisions that have come down, and they are directly affecting him. And basically, his comments are that he just wants to live independently. He has the ability to live independently, but he's not able to do so because of the structure that's in place today and the policy decisions that have been made today. He would be the only way he would be able to survive is to be institutionalized, and that's not right. And so that keeps pushing us to make sure that we have a loud voice specifically about this issue. But we also have the really amazing stories. I have to tell you, I received a $10 check in the mail the other day. And the $10 check came from East 9th Street. And I stopped over, I drove over, and I went to the woman's house that delivered the check to me, or mailed the check to me. And she was living in a difficult neighborhood and in a rough neighborhood, and she just wanted to participate because she said, "You must do this. You must be successful. You are laying out our future." And we sat down at her table and talked about that. And I have to tell you, that is an amazing impact on me personally, and it is an amazing impact once you meet some of these people that are facing real challenges that most of us really don't know. And that's really the driving force of this campaign.
For you, Ms. Anderson, the same kinds of things, I'm sure.
Absolutely. The stories of the sad stories that you meet in people's homes, the stories of health and human services, the budget cuts aside, just the fact that there are administrative, bureaucratic things that are in the way of funding these people. People have said to me, "I need to sit with you and discuss the issue once you're elected so we can ensure that this is taken care of. Call me, here's my phone number." That plus the people that are out of work looking for gainful employment. There are so many people that want to be back to work. So many people that are out of work that have the work ethic, will go to work on time, will show up every day, will pass a drug test, that cannot find gainful employment. We have an obligation and a responsibility to make certain that the policies in Harrisburg allow Erie to be prosperous and vibrant. And I'm prepared to go and fight for those things. Whether it's Republican or Democrat doesn't matter to me. It's the people of Erie that really make a difference. The other is the people of Erie that want their families back here. People that have skills, but they can't make it back because they would have to settle for a lesser job and be underemployed. We have an obligation to make sure that Erie is growing.
Let me begin the next question with Ms. Anderson, and this goes to both of you, of course. But Senator Earl has served us well for 16 years. That's a long time. Along with that comes a lot of political clout in Harrisburg, a big microphone, if you will. Either of you, if you are elected, one of you will be elected. You will not have that kind of political clout. What will you do? What sorts of committees will you try to get on to regain some of the political clout that's lost in this district?
Sure. I will go into the majority caucus, so I have an advantage. I will have the opportunity. I don't make the rules, this is the way it is, but I will have the opportunity to help determine what committees I can be on. I've already discussed the committee, the Community and Economic Development Committee, with Senator Scarnati, who is in leadership and will be in leadership in January. I will go into that committee, which is extremely important to our needs right here in Erie. I will have the opportunity to meet with members of the House because I'm in the majority caucus. I will also work very closely with the Republicans and Democrats in the Senate to make certain that we are sharing the information from Erie, the needs of Erie, and working together to put together plans that will help make Pennsylvania competitive so that we're able to move Erie forward. I will be able to do that from the majority caucus. My opponent won't have that same ability. So, we lose time if we elect my opponent. He's not a bad guy. It's not about that. It's truly about our voice. You talk about a strong voice. It's our voice in Harrisburg.
Please respond to that. You will not have the clout of your opponent.
I'm glad that I'm not a bad guy. That's nice. I have to tell you, we've heard a lot about this majority caucus. My opponent is saying that she's going to be sitting at the adult table and I'm going to be sitting at the kid table, I think is exactly what was said. I have to tell you, this is more than party. This is much bigger than that. This is about a common voice, a collaborative effort from Northwest Pennsylvania to make the changes that need to be made. I have been supported by the representatives here, our House members here in this area. Having the ability to have a common, collective, collaborative voice from Northwest PA to go to Harrisburg and deliver the message that needs to be made is critically important. Also, in the minority caucus, you have the ability to launch into leadership in committee much quicker than in the majority caucus as a freshman in the majority. And we have discussed different opportunities in committee. I'd love to see the education committee, the healthcare committee, because that is my background in healthcare. And understanding the needs of education and being very passionate about that. Transportation, which is huge need in our area with our infrastructure needs. So yes, we have an opportunity to have a voice. I've traveled to Philadelphia in the eastern part of the state, and the first thing that they say is, you know what, we've never talked about Northwest PA before now. This campaign, we've made a loud voice, and we've made a lot of noise in Northwest PA, and we're going to continue that as we go to Harrisburg.
Let's talk about an issue, I think, that has been put on the back burner because of certainly a court injunction, and that is Pennsylvania's new law that requires photo ID at the voting booth. Where do you stand on the law? Do you support it or do you oppose it? Mr. Wiley?
Well, I think that this launch in voter ID and the rush through in the bill and passing the bill through the caucus and through the governor's office was a clear indication of rushing it through and politicized completely by Representative Turzai's comments this year. He made it very clear that, I think a quote that he had said that now that we've passed this bill, Mitt Romney will win Pennsylvania. And that was a clear indication that this became completely politicized. I believe we need to give people the time, an appropriate amount of time, to make sure that they have the ability to get the identification that they need. I believe rushing it through, and the voices were heard. The voices were heard, and finally, the courts decided that this was not the year that that's going to happen. They saw through that, and they saw through the agenda and made it happen. And I'm very, very proud that they did.
Ms. Anderson, many people argue that the ID law would shut out the poor, minorities, the elderly. Do you support this law?
Let me go back for a minute and talk just briefly about the way that bills get passed. The process is that it enters the caucus. It gets entered into the committee, and the committee has to vote it out. And it is the majority caucus that does vote that out of committee and to the floor. So the majority caucus does have a significant role in the passage and the voice that we will have in Harrisburg. It's important that we understand that. I believe that my strong voice will be heard louder than my opponents. As far as the photo ID goes, Pennsylvania did rush that through. If you recall, Senator Jane Earl was not in favor of that and did not vote for it. I would have stood firm with Senator Jane Earl because it was rushed through. in the future, there will likely be some requirement for that. And we were geared up and prepared to make sure that if it came to pass this time, that we were able to get people, and we're already taking people to get their ID. Rather than complain about it, we were already taking action, and that's the way I will be in the Senate.
Let me follow up, Ms. Anderson. The majority party is the Republican Party in the Pennsylvania legislature and the state Senate. So am I to understand that if you are elected, you will not be an independent voice, that you will go lockstep with your party, march in lockstep?
I know it sounds that way. No, that is absolutely not true. I will be an independent voice. I will fight for the needs of the people of Erie. The majority caucus, however, allows me the opportunity to be independent and still be able to make phone calls and be heard, get phone calls back. That's what I'll be afforded in the majority caucus, even though I am an independent voice. And I've already reached out and talked to the governor about the issues. Education cuts. I told him, those proposed cuts were horrible. I've talked to him specifically about the reclassification. That will be a top priority of mine when elected and in Harrisburg, making certain that the governor himself, as well as the leaders in the Senate, understand the impact of that on Erie. So I will be independent, but I will have a stronger voice.
Mr. Wiley, your response?
The only time the majority is going to support your efforts is if you agree with the majority. I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. If you are in lockstep with your party and with the majority, which my opponent is continuing to make sure that everyone's clear that the Republican Party will be in the majority, then you must walk in lockstep with the decisions that are made by leadership in the party. That is a clear difference of what we're talking about here. We are a clear independent voice. We have the ability to have a loud voice and still be heard and still make decisions that impact this community. And I want to repeat, you must have support, collective support on both sides of the Capitol, and make sure that we can work very, very well in a collective effort with our House members as well. And that's the ability that we have, bringing that common voice to Harrisburg and making sure that we're all working on the same page and all working together to make the changes that need to be made.
Let me continue the conversation. Ms. Anderson, I think you probably have heard in all of your campaigning, the voters are surly. They have had it with party politics, and they want people to rise above party politics and work together for them. How do you do that? How can you be an independent voice and yet be in a majority party, which is the Republican Party?
Mm-hmm. It was just last week that Flo Fabrizio talked about his frustration in the House, now being in the minority party. He talked about that when we were at a forum together, and Pat Harkins agreed. It is difficult in the minority caucus to get things done, to get a bill moved out. It will be difficult for us to have a strong voice. I will reach across party lines to ensure that we continue that. It will be a minimum of 10 years. It's been more than 3 decades since the Senate has switched majority caucus. It will be a minimum of 10 years. Erie can't wait 10 years to be in the majority caucus in the Senate. I have worked with Flo Fabrizio at the county. I've worked with Pat Harkins while he was in Harrisburg. I would hope that they would continue to work with me and not treat me as though I were a Republican and they would want nothing to do with me. And I believe that they're both willing to do that. The difference is that having the strong voice in the Senate will allow Erie to continue moving in the positive direction that has been set by Senator Jane Earl.
Response, Mr. Wiley.
Well, again, I continue to say the same thing. The support that you get from the majority is when you are making decisions that coincide with the majority's decision, majority leadership. And that is the way it works. Please don't be fooled. That is exactly how it works in Harrisburg. And yes, would we love to be in the majority when we walk in the door? Absolutely. Absolutely we would. But that should not be the basis of why we're voting for a candidate to represent us. I believe that you have to look at the individual issues and make a decision on the philosophy of the candidate that best matches yours, and follow through and make sure that you support that philosophy. It is not about party. We keep talking about partisan politics here. We're talking about Republican majority, Democrat minority, whatever the case may be. This is about the issues. This is about how we advance our community forward and not about partisan politics.
Let me ask just a brief question because we're running out of time before closing statements, so I'm going to give you each 30 seconds, and I'm timing you. Let me ask you, and let's begin with you, Mr. Wiley. This is a grueling task to run for office for both of you. Why? Why on earth do you want this job, and why do this?
Great question. I get that question quite frequently.
30 seconds.
I have to tell you, I chased my grandfather around the courthouse, Dave Wiley, for 20 years. Chased him around when I was a kid. I knew I wanted to serve in some capacity. I truly did. I had the opportunity to serve as Director of Administration in Erie County and serve the community for 3.5 years. I knew I wanted to serve. I didn't know what capacity it was going to be in. I found exactly the position that best fits me, but most importantly, I fit the position. And I truly believe that I'm the best representation in the Senate for this community.
And for you, why do this, Ms. Anderson?
I also get asked that question frequently. I am doing it because I have committed myself to public service for 26 years in various capacities, in the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector. And I want to take that commitment to a next higher level. It's time for me to step up. I can make this commitment. I can make the commitment to this community. I can afford to spend the time for you, the people of Erie, and I'm prepared to do so.
And with that, we'll move to closing statements, and by coin toss, you begin the closing statements, Ms. Anderson.
I want to thank WQLN for inviting me here this evening and Sean Wiley for participating. It's great to be out here this evening to talk about many of the issues. I have 26 years of experience in economic development. I am completely committed to this position. I have spent, and you've heard this evening, numerous hours working with local businesses, talking to them about exactly what it is that they need to expand and grow right here in Erie, Pennsylvania. That's why we are looking at sowing the seeds of progress, looking at making Pennsylvania competitive so that we are able to attract and grow our local employers, looking at things like education so that we have the pipeline of the future, looking at our workforce development so that we're able to provide the immediate need of our employers. Also our infrastructure, so we're able to move our raw materials in, our goods and services out, and finally making certain that we have healthy and safe communities. Senator Jane Earl has all the trust and confidence in the world in me. She has put her endorsement behind me and is ready for me to take over in her stead. Governor Tom Ridge, Mark DeVecchio, the ironworkers, and several of the business groups in Pennsylvania, like the NFIB, the Pennsylvania Chamber, the Northwest Pennsylvania Food Council, have put their effort in and behind me to be their next advocate in Harrisburg, to represent all of them and all of you. I look forward to doing that for you. John F. Kennedy said, let's not make it a Republican decision. Let's not make it a Democrat decision. Let's make the right decision. I ask you for your vote on Tuesday, November 6th, because it is the right decision for Erie. Thank you.
Mr. Wiley, your closing
Thank
statement.
you. Thank you to WQLN for hosting the event. Thank you to Tom New for organizing it. Kim, thank you so much. Janet, thank you for participating.
Sure.
I truly do. I was born and raised in this community. I graduated from Fairview High School, and I received my bachelor's degree in business operations from DeVry University and came back home and went to work. The diverse background that I have in the private sector, in working in manufacturing and in the building industry, understanding the needs of business from the inside out in the private sector for 13 years, my role in county government, and understanding the true needs of this community, understanding the true needs of everyone throughout this community while I was in the role of Director of Administration, managing within a $380 million budget with responsible for 13 different departments, and most recently my role in healthcare, and understanding the needs not only of the people that need and deserve the care, but also the providers of that care, some of our largest employers throughout the Commonwealth. I believe that that diverse background is exactly what we need as we move forward in this community. That's the type of representation that we need in Harrisburg, to understand all elements of my background. This campaign has always been about you, has always been about how we can make this community better. I'm very proud of this campaign. I'm proud of the campaign that we've run. I'm so proud of everyone that has participated and made this reality. I thank you so much for having the opportunity to be here tonight, for allow the voters to really understand the differences. You've seen a clear difference in philosophy on so many issues. The decision you're going to be making on Tuesday, November 6th, is not about the next 4 years of our lives. It's about the next 40 years of our lives. It's a very important decision that you have to make. I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to be a candidate for the State Senate, and I'm asking for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Janet Anderson and Sean Wiley, thank you both very much for being here tonight. It's been a pleasure, and all of us here at WQLN certainly thank you, the audience, for tuning in and participating. Tonight's debate will be rebroadcast on WQLN Radio on my Weekend All Things Erie program, Saturday morning at 7 and again on Sunday at 3 o'clock. It will also be rebroadcast on Jet 24 at 2 o'clock on Saturday as well. The election is next Tuesday. President Franklin Roosevelt said, "Nobody will ever deprive the American people of the right to vote except the American people themselves, and the only way they can do that is by not voting. Make certain you don't deprive yourself of the right to vote. Get out and vote." Thank you for joining us, and good night.